Started. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again, or for the first time, whichever. Happy New Year. I'm Michelle Morris from Consolidated Planning Group, and I'm so glad you're here because today's webinar is so valuable. We've got Annalee Kruger from Care Right Incorporated today, and she's going to be talking to us about preparing for end of life decisions and thinking about all of those kinds of things that nobody really wants to think about. But it's so important. If you have someone who is aging, or if you have a special needs family member, it is so important that you plan now. And that's something that I always say. Plan now for that financial future. Plan now for a future health crisis. Plan now for end of life care and supports. And what does that look like? And Annalee is here to help us. She's going to provide a checklist for you that you will receive probably in email, right, Annalee?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after today's webinar is over, we will send you the slides, we will send you a link to the recording, and we will send you this very valuable checklist so that nothing is missed as you're considering the tough decisions that you have to make regarding your loved one's end of life care. Um, Annalee is going to help organize our thoughts and offer detailed advice for arranging our legal teams, our financial teams, our residential care professionals, all of that stuff, so that everybody will be treated with dignity, kindness, and respect at the end of their lives. So, before I turn everything over to her, I just want to go through a little bit. First, the housekeeping items. We are in webinar mode, which means that we cannot hear you or see you. We know you're out there. We can see the participant count. But we certainly want to answer any questions or comments that you have for us. And you can just go ahead and put those in the chat box if you have any questions or concerns. And I'll throw those out to Annalee as long as they pertain to, what she's talking about. And I'll answer some of your questions as well. Again, I'm Michelle Morris with Consolidated Planning Group. We are a special needs financial planning firm. We take a holistic approach to financial advising. We look at people's investments and life insurance. We do securities. We do all of those things, but we do it through the lens of understanding that our loved ones might not be able to be completely independent. They might not be able to keep a full-time job that is going to provide for them, and they might not be able to live independently. So the situation is a little bit different, and we give our guidance based on that view. We've been doing this for over 30 years. We are members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. We are National Social Security Advisors. We are chartered special needs consultants, and we can help you with all areas of your financial picture. But mainly, families come to us for special needs planning. And this isn't like something that one or two of our clients needs
Mhm.
from us. This is really what we
Mhm.
focus on every single day. And 90 something percent of our clients have special needs loved ones in their lives. They want to talk to us about protection plans for their family, lifetime care planning, transition planning, ABLE accounts and benefits like SSI and Medicaid, SSDI and Medicare, the state waiver programs, all of that stuff. And we work all across the United States. Even though we're based in Texas, we can help people all across the United States. And today's information is really going to be helpful for you no matter where you live. And we're also here to advocate for you and to educate you. There are over 263,000 financial advisors across the United States. But out of those 263,000, Fewer than 200 financial advisors focus on special needs planning like we do. That's less than a tenth of a percentage. So whether you're in Texas or Indiana or Iowa or California or Florida or anywhere across the United States, Consolidated Planning Group can help you. Um, we know that one of the main things that keeps you awake at night is thinking about who will care for your loved one when you can't do it anymore. And maybe you can't do it because you yourself have become disabled, or you're coming to the end of your life and you're slowing down, or maybe, your loved one becomes aggressive. There are many different reasons why you might not be able to take care of them every single day in the future. So what can you do? Well, the most important thing is to start planning right now. Doesn't matter how old or how young your loved one is. The earlier you plan, the more impact you can have over time with small, incremental, easy changes instead of waiting towards the later in life. And now you have to make big, intimidating, scary changes. So let's get you on track with little changes now that are going to have a big impact on your future. We always advocate that you should think about what's going to happen after high school for your loved ones. If we're talking about, an individual with special needs, there are residential options, there are vocational options, there are educational options. There's a lot available. There are tons of resources, summer camps and day programs and transition programs and all of that stuff. You don't want them just to graduate to the couch, right? The other thing that you should think about is touring those programs and those residential communities early in case they have a wait list. You want to see what you're getting yourselves into before you jump in. And if they have a wait list, it would be horrible for you to find just that right place, and then you have to wait for it. So we suggest that you go ahead and start touring places early to see what's available, what's out there, and make careful consideration. Give it a lot of thought before you just assume that a sibling is going to be able to step in and take care of your loved one. Um, let's say older sister Sarah and young autistic brother Jacob. All of these years, Sarah has fully loved her brother and she wants to help and she wants to help take care of him. But when it comes right down to it, maybe she's going to have her own life and career and challenges and family and children. And she's just not going to be realizing how much she's biting off, right? How big of a deal this is. And she might start to feel a little bit of resentment towards mom and dad who just say, "Oh, Sarah, you're just going to take care of Jacob, right?" And on the other hand, think about it from Jacob's point of view. Maybe young Jacob, who has autism, he loves his sister. He's been best friends with her all his life. They've had a great relationship. But now all of a sudden, Sarah wants to act like mom. Well, you're not my mom. You're my sister. You're not supposed to enforce the rules. We're supposed to have fun together. What is this? And Jacob might start feeling resentment towards his sister as well. So just be really, really careful with that family dynamic. Okay. That's all we ask. So without any more blabbing from me, I'll talk a little bit more at the end, but I want to introduce Annalee at Care Right Incorporated because this information is so, so important. And I really appreciate you being here to share this with us.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and thank you for everyone who's carved out time in your, I know, very busy days to be a part of this webinar. Whether you're live now or you're going to catch the replay, just thank you for having the mindset of, hey, I want to be realistic and I want to be proactive, knowing that at some point things are going to change for our loved ones and we need to be having a plan for that. So if the goal is that we have the best possible care outcomes and family relationships through this whole process, we want to have these conversations now about the what whens of aging or the what whens of when Jacob needs more care. So I do the same thing with elderly. and the special needs. So we'll talk about what that looks like. So who is Annalee Kruger? That picture was pre-bus accident where a bus driver was distracted and blew through a four-corner stop and ran me over. Um, so so that picture was in the good old days. So that's why I have that one there. So I used to work in continuing care retirement communities, the ones that have all the different levels of care: independent living, assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing and skilled rehab. I did that for 22 years. And that was back when these continuing care retirements were first just coming out. Otherwise, it was just like nursing homes, right? That was pretty much all you had. You either stayed at home and either failed or thrived at home. You moved in with your kids, or you had to go to a nursing home because we didn't have all these different care levels back then. So in the 90s, when the continuing care retirements started coming out, I used to be a social worker, marketing director, and eventually executive director in those for over 22 years. Every single day, I had the same dilemma. Adult kids were thrust into the role of decision making. Mom fell, she broke her hip. She's the primary caregiver to dad with dementia. Back then in the 90s, though, kids all lived down the street from each other. So it seems like they got along better because they had a relationship and they worked a little bit more as a team. But they were still thrust into, oh my gosh, now both parents need help. What are we going to do? Who can take time off work? My husband has MS. I have to take care of him, and how am I gonna now help take care of mom and dad? And so you can see how things get really dicey really quickly. Because when your loved one falls and breaks a hip or has a stroke, no one plans for that. No one wakes up that morning and think, oh, I think I'm going to have a major stroke today. But it happens to thousands and thousands of people every day. And then it starts this whole cycle of, oh my gosh, what do we do now with the adult kids and the healthy spouse? So every day the kids will be coming in because the hospital will say, here's a list of care facilities. Go find one by noon tomorrow because your mom is going to be discharged. And so the kids would literally come in and they would be touring the facility, and just stepping into the care community was like, oh my gosh, what is this? Like, how am I supposed to put my mother or my father in this type of environment? But they didn't know what questions to ask, and they didn't know what to look for during the tours. And their eyes were like just deer in the headlight the whole time. And so here I am walking them through well, your dad sounds like he's going to need memory care. So let's go tour the memory care unit. Your mom is going to need rehab. So let's go look at the rehab unit. And the kids were so overwhelmed. They're crying. They're not getting along. And so after the tour, I'd sit them down in my office and then, okay, so do your parents have a living will? I don't know. What's that? Do they have long-term care insurance? I don't know. Our family never talks about stuff like that. Is your dad a veteran? I don't know. We've never talked about that. So like there's just so much unknowns with the adult kids, and they truly just had no idea. And so in 20 and so I'm spending all this time like educating them about Medicare and Medicaid and dementia, and no, Medicare is not going to pay 100% of what your mom's care needs are. And why is dad acting the way he is? Well, because he has dementia and this is what you can expect. So I was spending 2 and 3 hours at a time with each of these families, just consulting with them and coaching them and helping them understand. So in 2011, I left corporate America to start Care Right Incorporated. I went virtual right away back in 2011. We only had Skype back then because families just didn't live down the street from each other like they used to. So the only way I could facilitate family meetings was to leverage technology. The adult kids loved it because they're like, oh, I just got back to Arizona from Milwaukee because I was in Milwaukee at the time, and they're like, "Oh, I can't take off even more time to come back to Milwaukee. I just got back home. I can't take more time off work to like fly back and like meet with you." And I'm like, "Well, you don't have to do that. I work smarter, not harder. I'm a farm kid. That's our whole motto is work smarter, not harder." We leveraged technology and the kids loved it. And through the course of time, our elderly loved ones are more tech savvy than they were back in obviously the 90s. So it works out really well. So everything I do is virtual. So just like With CPG, it doesn't matter where you live. As long as you have a phone or the internet, I can help you and facilitate your family meetings and explore what's working well, what's not working well, what are the goals, what are the resources that we have to work with. So then we can reverse engineer of, okay, that's great. Mom and dad want to age in place at home, but how feasible, how safe, and how affordable is it? And that's kind of what we shrink wrap into what I call an aging plan. That said, 92% of our families come to us in crisis mode rather than proactive because dad's now had a stroke or mom broke her hip or the primary caregiver died, or the primary caregiver daughter ended up getting a diagnosis of cancer, and so now she's like, I can't I can't take care of myself plus mom and dad. So it's pretty much always crisis mode. And 85% of our families, because they're coming to us in crisis mode versus proactive, their relationships are very, very strained. They're angry, they're resentful, they're overwhelmed, and things, I'm not seeing them at their best because they're that overwhelmed and scared. So anyway, we help families with all of this all through the lifespan from aging planning all the way through end of life. So let's talk about, are you ready for a crisis? Here we go. Hang on to your hat. So there's a lot of information in here, but like Michelle said, you're going to get a copy of these slides anyway. And then I have a checklist of additional information that we'll send out, or that they will send out to you as well. So I'll get that updated and get that over to CPG so they can send that out to you as well today. So think about, as you probably spend a lot of your time worrying about, well, what about Jacob? What about, that's a good example. I'm glad that you kind of set the set the stage with that.
Oh, good,
So,
good.
so we didn't even practice that. So good job. So you think about, okay, well, Jacob's needs are so significant that I feel burned out already taking care of Jacob. And then when you get that crisis call that your mom fell and she broke her hip and dad's dementia is worse, you might not have a lot of time bandwidth and certainly emotional bandwidth, because maybe your child takes so much of your time and energy that you just don't have any more grit. You don't have anything more to give to someone else who needs so much time and energy from you. So that's where this relationship that I have, or the Care Right has with CPG, is a perfect partnership, or I shouldn't say partnership, but relationship, because we do the planning and CPG does the special needs planning. So let's talk about what that looks like. So now your role is of a disabled loved one plus a special needs child or adult child. So educating yourself about your loved one's disabilities. Medication and healthcare management takes up so much time. We know that at least 22 hours a week are spent for adult kids taking care of and overseeing the needs of their aging parents, medication monitoring, making sure dad's prescriptions didn't run out, coordinating his doctor's appointments, making sure he got to his doctor's appointments. We'll talk later about that caregiver snowball, about how caregiving starts out feeling maybe manageable and doable until it doesn't. And then what? And then that's when people find themselves in crisis. Through aging planning, we want to make sure that there's proper emotional supports in place, because literally every family who contacts Care Right is the burned out son or daughter or spouse of someone who's very ill or demented. And they just don't have any emotional bandwidth left. They're not sleeping, they're not eating, they're tearful, they feel impatient, and then they feel guilty for being impatient. They say things that they would normally not say, but they're just burning out. So we need to make sure that we always safeguard that family caregiver. Developmental and educational advocacy is critical, whether um, every patient, young and senior, and their family ought to feel confident with a healthcare professional assigned to them, meaning making sure that healthcare professionals are doing what they should be doing for our loved ones, that they're properly trained and properly supervised and properly managed. And in a lot of cases, they aren't. In our healthcare system, especially since COVID, we have a major shortage of quality healthcare workers. And so our healthcare system is pretty sideways right now. So having that education about how to be a bold advocate is something that we take our clients through so that you have better confidence that you know how to be an advocate and that the healthcare providers are following through with what needs to be done. Financial planning and for current and future care needs, we do that with our clients so that we can help outline what are current and future care options based on what your loved one can afford. And oftentimes, because I work with, you know, our clients tend to be the aging parents and their adult kids. So my clients, the whole family. But because I have a lot of moms and dads, Ethels and Marvins, who kept Johnny, who's got Down syndrome, home with them his whole life. Now mom and dad are in their 80s and 90s or 100 and they're needing care, but now so does Johnny. And so what do we do? Because they've always lived together, Johnny doesn't qualify to get into the same type of care communities that mom and dad do because he's too young or they're not equipped to deal with his care needs. So that's why that's why this relationship is a really powerful relationship between Care Right and CPG. Um, and so we also look at preparing for the long term. It's it's common sense. It just doesn't feel like it's common sense, but like when you just step back and realize none of us are going to nobody gets stronger, nobody gets more mobile, nobody gets more cognizant, and nobody gets more independent as we age. So why wouldn't we want to proactively say, look, I can see the writing on the wall. Mom's lost weight, dad's memory is worse. Like, let's get ahead of this. Those things are going to happen, but let's have a plan in place so that we know as a family what is our aging in place at home care budget? What are going to be those safety triggers? Whether it's whether it's for Ethel and Marvin or Jacob, right? So
Right,
next
and it's
slide.
so hard to know too, just when is the right time? What are you looking for to get onto that next situation, How do you yeah, so many questions.
Well, and one of the questions that I get all of the time is, well, you know, everything is going okay for right now. And I'm like, that's great. This is the time to put the plan in place because your family is still getting along and you're not emotional. You're not making high pressure decisions because that's if there are any cracks in those family relationships that are only going to get worse when there's crisis after crisis. I mean, your relationships don't magically just get better on their own. That's why we are neutral third party family meeting facilitators. So you can see how like working with families for an aging plan aligns really well with special needs planning as well. So like Michelle talked about it early on, you know, getting out there and touring those group homes or touring those care options for your special needs child. That's what we do with our aging parents as well through our care matrix project that we encourage families to participate in. So I think we've got that covered pretty well, that there's pretty good alignment and similarities between special needs and aging planning. So let's talk about caregiving triggers. As parents age, they're likely to need caregiving because of death or disability of the spouse who's maybe the primary caregiver. We know that I think it's like 63% of primary caregivers over the age of 60 die prematurely because of the needs of caregiving. You know, when you're not eating, sleeping, because dad's got his days and nights mixed up. And so you're just, and you're not having your own surgeries and procedures, you self neglect your own needs. And then the primary caregiver tends to pass away first. And then everybody's really surprised by that. So I'm here to say, don't be surprised by that. Let's put an aging plan in place so that we can prevent those premature deaths. But other caregiver triggers, like I said, no one expects to have a fall or a stroke or a chronic illness or, you know, going to the doctor thinking you just have a stomach ache and then coming out with a diagnosis of, you know, a GI bleed or stomach cancer or things like that. Dementia progression, every single family in the 30 years that I've been working with families, it is the same thing every time. We thought we had more time. We didn't realize mom was as confused as she was. I mean, it takes drastic things to happen before adult kids wake up and get out of denial and be like, oh my gosh, we didn't realize dad was wandering out of the house. We didn't realize hitting mom every time she was trying to get him bathed or feed him. They just didn't know. And so they're always blindsided by how quickly dementia can progress, or blindsided by how confused their loved one is. And we're doing this webinar in January. I can always tell when kids start visiting their aging parents for Thanksgiving and Christmas, because my phone rings off the hook anyway, like 24, like 365 days a year. But I can always tell when the adult kids are starting to come home and visit their parents, because they're like, oh my gosh, Annalee, Dad's lost 25 pounds since I was here last year, or he didn't recognize me, or the house smelled like a nursing home. We didn't realize that he was incontinent. And, all of those things are triggers for families to wake up and say, we need to figure out what we're going to do here. Medication errors. Why this is critical is because a lot of adult kids assume that their parents are doing better at home than they really are. And so they're not asking, well, mom or dad, what are your medication systems? Like, who's your pharmacy? How often do you need to get these refilled? How are you doing your medication? Are you leaving them in the pill bottles and then like they're in a shoebox, or like what is your system? And adult kids, unless you're there all the time, they really don't even know what their parents' medications are, and they don't know they don't know their parents' medical providers either. Medication errors are common, especially when you think that your parents are following through with prescription changes or not taking outdated prescriptions, or your loved one has memory impairment and they're just taking their pills willy-nilly, if they're taking them at all, or they're doubling up on them. And so there's a lot of red flags that families tend to not realize. And so that's why I'm so glad there are so many people on this webinar. Inability to perform activities of daily living like bathing, dressing, toileting, transferring, getting in and out of the chair, eating, and continence, where they can't hold their bowel or they can't hold their bladder. So that's when, again, adult kids are like, oh, mom's clothes are hanging off of her, or the house smells like a nursing home, or she's incontinent and all of her clothes were soiled in the closet, and no wonder the house smells like. So those are the red flags that I just want to like pound home into this
Mhm.
webinar. Next. Caregiving responsibilities increase over time. I'm just going to call this the caregiver snowball. Like I said, it's one thing to take care of mom when she had her broken hip, because we're pretty sure that in 4 to 6 weeks she's going to like gradually get better, because she'll be in physical therapy and occupational therapy and get stronger. And you're like, yeah, we can probably suck this up for 4 to 6 weeks, or take FMLA for 4 to 6 weeks. But it's one thing then to take care of someone with a chronic disease like dementia or Parkinson's or MS or ALS, where their needs are just going to increase over time as their chronic disease progresses. And eventually, those care needs will derail your careers, your finances, your family relationships all across the board. Even the most loving, supportive spouses in time will say, look, honey, I love your parents, but these airplane tickets from Ohio to Arizona every 2 months is adding up, because that's out of pocket. Or you're not taking the job promotion because you're like, I can't, because every time I think mom and dad are doing okay, then the other shoe drops and I get that next crisis call that mom fell, or dad was in a car accident, or he got lost driving and the police are calling me. So there's always something that kind of tips that snowball into it was doable until it's not, where caregiving really takes over your life, your emotions, your feelings, and impacts your relationships and your emotional well being as well. Eventually, our parents are just going to need 24/7 care and supervision, because, again, we don't get healthier as we age. That's why on my book, The Invisible Patient, the emotional, financial, and physical toll on family caregivers, you can see that I put a bench, a lonely bench, because every single family caregiver feels like they're in this journey by themselves and they're isolated and they're alone. And that's just not sustainable and it's not healthy. So we want to think about, how do we want to remember the last few years of our lives with our aging parents, angry, overwhelmed, burned out as caregivers, or having that sense of balance because we have an aging plan in place, which means we have enough supports in place. We're making smart decisions so that your relationship, um, weight, if you will, can be more like just being the son or the daughter instead of the weight of the relationship being I'm just their caregiver, instead of they just want to at some point you just want to go over to be the son or the daughter and watch a Packers game instead of going over and realizing there's a 20 list of to-do items, because then it makes it less fun and then you go over because you have to instead of because you want to. All right, next slide.
If I could just add in here real quick,
Absolutely.
this is one area that we talk about a lot. When you're thinking about the waiver programs, some states have very short waiting list for these waivers that can help your loved ones, your loved ones with a disability. Some states like Texas have very long waiting lists. And
Mhm.
we always talk about the crisis diversion spot. This is something that could get you pushed to the front of the waiting line for any of the waiver programs. And what we say is one of the things that they will consider as a crisis, if you are taking care of your child with a disability, and then all of a sudden now you also have to take care of mom and dad who are going through their own end of life care, that can be counted as a crisis. So you want to call your local authority, your LIDA, um, or go to yourtexasbenefits.com and look and see where you are on that waiting list. But you can get pushed up into a crisis diversion spot if you're going through all of this.
Mhm. And it's good to know. That's why CPG does special needs planning so that you know what resources are available so that you're not doing this at the 11th hour and then literally scared. I'm a social worker by background, right? So all of these things are scary because you find yourselves in over your head and you bite off more than you can chew. And the other thing is all these calls have to be done during work hours, right? You're not going to get a hold of the county at 7 o'clock at night. So when you work during the day, like that's why we do what we do with our families, and that's why CPG does what they do with families, because we make it easier for you instead of spinning your wheels, spending unnecessary time being overwhelmed and anxious and the learning curve. It's all done for you. So it's really good to know. So like for elderly, we have the age, every county has the Aging and Disability Resource Center, the ADRC. So that can be a stopgap, but they're not going to help you with any of this like nuanced planning. They're just going to give you a resource and then you still have to do it yourself. All right. So, are you headed for a crisis? Know the warning signs before your caregiving responsibilities negatively impact your family, your marriage, your relationships, your career, your finances, your retirement planning, and your emotional and physical well being. What I want to bring home on this is because I feel like I've already said, caregiving without a plan and enough supports in place will derail your career because you're going to have to keep stepping back or step away from your business every time there's a problem. And what kids tend to do, and it just makes sense because you don't know about an aging plan until today, probably, is they just band aid it. They're like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to take 2 weeks off of work again, miss a vacation or miss your daughter's soccer tournament because you've got to fly to Texas or Arizona or wherever it is your parents live. In time, I promise you and I guarantee you that's just not going to be sustainable for your finances. All that emergency airfare plus the missed work plus every time that phone rings and you're like, "Oh, now what happened?" Or every time you have to say, "Oh gosh, honey, we're going to miss another vacation. You guys go without me because I need to figure out what to do with mom and dad." It's just not sustainable. And then relationship wise, like you would hope that the aging process would bring families together, but it does not. And like I said, any cracks in your relationships as a family with your siblings or with your parents, they will widen with that aging process because the aging process is bumpy. Just when you think things are okay, then they're not again. And then you're starting all over from scratch. And then there's that massive learning curve. And the problem with that is because adult kids don't really know what they're doing, they make a lot of very expensive, could have been unavoidable mistakes with their parents because they didn't know what they didn't know, like parent bouncing as an example. I have families every week. Well, when I get burned out with mom, I just bounce her over to my sister. So I call it parent bouncing, but that's just band-aiding. That's not like, so now you just get burned out for your 6 months and then you're like, oh, and then when it's your 6 months due again to take mom, you're like, oh, I don't want to do this. So that's how these things can affect relationships as well. That's why 85% of my billable time is actually family mediation, because by the time families come to us, they're so overwhelmed and burned out, they truly aren't getting along. All right, next slide. So we talked about that caregiver snowball. Um, Again, starting out, caregiving starts out like maybe, or aging parents, the realization starts out kind of mild, like, yeah, okay, mom's starting to get a little forgetful, or she's lost a couple of pounds, or she's starting to get unsteady when she's walking, or making poor decisions. Like when someone calls and asks for the bank account, she's like, sure, here it is, or she's opening the door to people she doesn't know, or any kind of poor decision making, driving with a car on empty, and maybe she's always done that, but now it's worse because she can't walk without a walker, so it's not like she can hoof it to the gas station, right? Not paying their bills. Those are all like concerning things that are, the signs are always there. It's just families don't always know to look for it, or they don't want to talk about it, or they're in denial, so they just wait until like disaster strikes and then wait to figure things out. The growing concern, because I have another a different slide that's, it's like a crisis triangle, but this is more like burnt out this way. So the growing concern is more falls, more ER visits. These are all signs that things are not going well with your parents at home, and wandering because of confusion and dementia, sundowning, where they get even more confused, agitated, and paranoid in the afternoon and evening hours, and they don't know where they are. They're looking for their kids, or they're trying to find their kids on the school bus. Those are all signs of sundowning, or they're paranoid. And you're getting concerned that your loved one has dementia. You're worried that they're going to get scammed. Probably about 500 families or more a year actually just come to Care Right for crisis because the kids finally realized that their parents weren't able to manage their own funds. So when they did go to visit, and they're like, oh my gosh, they have like 3 months worth of mail stacked up, and they start going through the mail and they're like, oh my gosh, mom and dad's credit cards are maxed out. All of those kinds of things are happening because there's not enough oversight. That's why I do these webinars, to say these are warning signs. Please don't ignore them. You start providing more care oversight, and now it's starting to become really apparent that, hey, things aren't going really well. You start mentioning these concerns to your siblings. If you have siblings, if you're an only child, then all of this is on you, and that's where it gets really overwhelming as well. But you start having the conversations like, hey guys, things aren't going great with dad. This is what I found when I went to visit, or this is what he told me on the phone. So then that's when we go into the next stage, where you're like, now you're starting to miss more work. You're dropping off meals, or you're having meals shipped and sent. You're starting to handle the medications. Your kids or their grandkids are like, hey, I guess I'll be living with grandpa on the weekends in between college, so that I can make sure at least on the weekends he's okay. Or you're starting to coordinate doctor's appointments, which again, a lot of this has to be done during normal business hours if your parents aren't on like software platforms like my chart. If some of that you can obviously, that you can sometimes do after hours, but you still have to be able to talk to the doctor and have them at the doctor's appointments during the daytime. And you're getting really overwhelmed and you're wondering, oh my gosh, I'm in over my head. And then you realize your loved one's dementia has progressed, and you're really starting to struggle to handle the mood changes and behavior and personality changes associated with that dementia disease. Then you head into the major disruption, where now it's like you can't keep your head in the sand anymore. And so now you're really trying to ring the alerts with your siblings and look, say like, look, mom and dad have been in the ER, they've had falls, they've had all of these red flags. We need to do something about it. And still, when families try to ring that alarm bell, there's still going to be siblings that are like, no, you've always over exaggerated, or there's all these family dynamics that come up. That's again why 85% of my time is spent doing family mediation. Everybody has a different sense of quality of life and how inheritance should be spent, or how confused mom or dad are. And that's where, when adult kids try to have these own kind of sidebar family meetings, it tends to go sideways because it's hard to have these conversations, and it gets really emotional really quickly. That's why there's value in that neutral third party family meeting. And then you start feeling really alone, and you feel like you're the only person in the world taking care of aging parents, and it's now consumed everything in your life, and it's not healthy, nor is it sustainable. Then you reach total burnout and crisis mode, and that's unfortunately where families tend to be when they call us. So it gets pretty complicated with family dynamics. Their care options might be pretty limited because maybe the parent got scammed out of $500,000, and so now they only have $100,000 left. And how are we going to manage, paying for care when there's not a lot of resources left? So you can see how that caregiver snowball, it it leads to all things bad when you don't have a plan in place. Just like with the special needs, if you're willy-nilly with it, you're going to have willy-nilly outcomes. And that's the same thing with aging parents. Like, we plan so well for everything else in our life, our jobs, our careers, our marriages, our retirements. So why would we be willy-nilly with a special needs child or vulnerable adult or an aging loved one? All right. So signs of caregiver burnout, and I've kind of sprinkled this in throughout, but the reason I do that, and then I pack a punch with like, these are real signs, because the adult kids, when I'm doing their consults, because it's always the adult kids who call me, it's rarely the parents, it's the adult kids. They're like, "Well, yeah, now that I can like sit back and take a breath because dad's been in the hospital for 2 weeks, so I actually can have some like mental clarity. I didn't realize I was getting depressed 6 months ago or a year ago, or I was feeling anxiety. Now I'm in therapy, or I'm taking all these pills because of anxiety because of aging parents." And I'm like, "Well, how about we put a plan in place, and then maybe you can like back off and maybe not have to take all those pills, because the stress isn't as is not going to be there because now we have an aging plan." So caregiver burnout, when you start noticing changes in your mood and behavior and personality, sleep and physical and mental health, where you're getting snappy, you're getting impatient, you're gritting your teeth, you're saying or behaving in a way that is really out of character for you, those are indications that you don't have enough supports in place and you don't have a plan in place. Or when your friends or loved ones are saying, "Look, we haven't seen you out and about, or you've missed Bible study, or you haven't been able to go out and get your hair done because dad's needs exceed what you can what you can physically do." Sometimes it's our friends and families that are saying, "Look, we got to figure something out because this is hurting you."
And
You're
isn't it great that these things happen to coincide with the time frame, the
Yeah.
age where some of us women are starting to go through our own changes, our own menopause and hot flashes and emotional changes and dealing with that on top of everything else we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's a real
So
party.
it's
It's
so
a real
nice.
party.
So wonderful.
Well, and speaking of women too, like a lot of women, put their career on hold, or, I have employees, and half of my employees have special needs children, and that's why they are only part-time, or they only do computer work, or they're in charge of my email because they can do that whether Johnny is having an outburst or not, and so
Mhm.
so all of this really impacts every single aspect of your life. So you never know when someone may have a stroke, a fall, or a sudden illness. Often adult kids are thrust into having to be a caregiver, and they've never had a family meeting or know really what to do in the state of a crisis. And this is even just as critical or more critical with families who have special needs members, because again, if your child, your adult child with special needs, is so time and energy and financially consuming, and then you get that call that dad had a stroke, you're not, we can only do what we can do, right? We're not Superman or Superwoman. We all have a limit, and that's why it just makes sense to put that plan in place. The best care is making real changes that can provide long term support to ease the burden and uncertainty of caregiving. And so we have, I don't need to go into like all of the different types of services, but just know that, my mission is when I started Care Right in 2011, my mission is leave no family caregiver or their senior/vulnerable adult behind. I truly believe that every family deserves to have the best aging, family caregiving, care options, and end of life journey possible. But the only way to do that is when we start having these conversations and putting a plan in place. Now, obviously, not everybody can afford or wants to pay the white glove approach of direct consulting to like hold your hand through this whole process. And that's okay. As I also have the do it yourself options, do it yourself tools where it's for the folks that are more Home Depot-ish who are like, hey, just give me some information and I'll figure it out on my own. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Like, that's not how I'm wired. Because for me, I don't want the learning curve. I want to just like have it done right and do it right the first time. So, next slide. So when is the right time to contact us? I literally say now, like said that like on all three meetings I had this morning because they're like, oh, when should we actually do this aging planning? I'm like, now before you end up in crisis mode, because then it's going to cost you more, and it's going to have you're going to have crisis outcomes for care options because then you only have the care options that are available at the time that you need it versus having a well thought out, careful decision making process. So the time is now. Because again, all the people who had major strokes last Thursday didn't wake up thinking, oh, I think I'm going to have a major stroke today. But again, thousands of people did. Life has its own agenda. Strokes happen, falls, dementia progression, other incidents. Just like with me, I mean, I was literally hit by a school bus on my 4 days after my 40th birthday. I didn't wake up thinking that, oh, I'm going to get hit by a bus today crossing the street, helping an 82-year-old man cross the street. But I did. And thank God it was me that got hit and not him because it would have killed him. But that's why it's important to have these plans. I mean, even at my age back then, and I'm way older than that now, but
Stop.
Huh. So, but even at my age back then, I had my grab and go binder, my living will, my power of attorney. I've had tons of conversations with my brother and sister who are my power of attorney because I don't have kids. So I'm like, this is what I want done if something ever happens to me. But this is what I'm trying to encourage families to do as well. Like, none of us are too young to have something terrible happen to us. All the people leaving work didn't expect to get T-boned in the interstate in the intersection, but they did, right? So what are you going to do? When you plan ahead, it's pretty obvious. When you plan ahead, you have better outcomes, better options, and you're making more financially sound decisions versus when you're in crisis mode. Example of this: when I work with clients, my care rate clients, a lot of them don't even have a living will or a power of attorney in place. And so now that dad's got dementia, and he doesn't have lucid, he's not lucid, and he's lacked capacity, and because the family didn't have any kind of even the legal planning in place, for emergency guardianship and conservatorship, I have this happen all the time. That's 20,000 bucks right there just because you didn't plan ahead, and you spend a couple 3,000 on estate planning and now you're shelling out 20 grand because and going through court, which of course is all during normal business hours as well. So you can see, like, it just makes sense to plan ahead from every aspect. That's why we do comprehensive planning. It's like, okay, what do you have in order? Do you have a living will? Do you have your grab and go binder? Do you have your accounts, your passwords, your all things insurance, everything in one spot so that when you need it, you have it? And we've had multiple family meetings to discuss all of this. So it's kind of built in memory muscle or muscle memory, so that when you need all of this information, you have it at your fingertips. You know that it's updated, it's current, and that you have a plan in place. Okay. So, so basically what I share with families is we are family caregiver, senior care, dementia, end of life and care options consultants. So pretty much all of that, anything about aging and caregiving and life transitions. We are not a placement company. Those are just companies that do placement. They're like, okay, Ethel needs to go into a facility, and then they take the kickback from whatever facility that they refer them to. We are not that at all. We are an actual legitimate ethical business fee for service where we do comprehensive planning, the family meetings, the grab and go binder, and we follow our clients all the way through end of life. So that way it's a white glove approach for those who want it, or they can do any of our digital do it yourself, or take our the other thing that we implemented like 3 years ago, because all these families, right, feel so alone and isolated in the caregiver journey. So I created the aging plan hybrid where you can take classes, the watered down version of an aging plan, but you can take classes and develop your own aging plan, but still have weekly office hours with me. So that's been a really cool thing, because then that solves for families not feeling alone and isolated. They're getting an aging plan and they still have time with me to ask questions. So it's really a good blend of everything. Because again, my mission is leave no family caregivers behind. All right. I feel like I've kind of brought home what we can help you with, anything aging, special needs planning from a care perspective and family meetings perspective. Because I don't want this to feel like a commercial. I just want you to know that if any of
Yeah.
this hits home, if any of this hits home for you, we can help you. And it starts with a 30-minute consult to find out, okay, what really is the solution that seems like the best fit for right now. Okay.
Do you want to go over this one or skip it?
No, I think we can skip it because I want to save time for questions, because I know there's a lot of people on here.
Yeah, yeah. If anybody has questions, please put them in the chat box as we're wrapping up these last few slides.
Yep. So we facilitate family meetings, the care matrix, like I kind of touched on, it's a done for you project where we do all the market research. It saves you the time, money, and stress and angst and learning curve of blindly and randomly touring care communities or group homes to find out, oh, your loved one doesn't qualify, or they got cited for abuse or neglect, or they have a 7-year waiting list and you needed care like yesterday. So everything that we do as far as that goes is that white glove approach, because otherwise families make really terrible decisions because they just don't know what they don't know. And I can't always undo what families thought that they knew, unfortunately.
Yep, we deal with that a lot too.
Yes, so do attorneys. Yep. All right. The digital grab and go. The reason why that's important is because, like I said, most families, like when I was still an employee and I'm like, do your parents have living wills, power of attorney, all that, long term care insurance? They're like, I don't know. Well, this solves for that, right? And plus, everyone over the age of 18 should have a grab and go, because again, at 40 years old, I didn't expect to get hit and run over by a distracted school bus driver either. So, so this way it outlines everything that you have in place, and it makes you have to look at the documents. A lot of adult kids think that their parents got their living wills and power of attorneys done because they talked about, well, dad talked about going to see an attorney, but did they actually get signed? Because sometimes what happens is dad never makes it back over to the attorney office, or dad had a stroke or a fall in between. And so you think that these documents are in place, but they really aren't. And
Right.
so then,
And this would be a great place for you to stick the letter of intent that we've
yes,
often talked about for your special needs loved ones as well. Um, yeah, and I always say put it in a binder, don't leave it on your laptop behind a password, because unless people know the passwords,
yeah,
they're not going to be able to find that stuff.
that's right. And we have special needs tab or a special needs section in our digital grab and go, because that way, if God forbid something happens to you and you're the parent, here's who are the doctors, the emergency contacts. And that's why, again, we strongly encourage our families to stay on our care package service so that we can keep these conversations going. So questions here are
People
cost
are
of,
very curious about the cost for your services. So you did mention a consultation. Do you do
yeah.
the initial consultation for free?
Yeah, so so it starts with a free 30-minute Zoom consult. And that way I can learn more about what your unique situation is. Because sometimes people just want the grab and go binder, which you can buy that off my website. It's not a binder, it's digital. It's a huge checklist. So you can buy that off the website. You can buy the do-it-yourself aging guide right off the website. Um, so that's all on the website. Every family is unique though, right? So that's why we start with the 30-minute consult, because maybe you just want the care matrix, or maybe you just need help with family meetings. So it starts with that. I have hourly consulting rates, which are 300 an hour, like a typical consultant. um, and then I have package rates as well, for those who really want to make sure that this is done properly. But like I said, it starts with a 30-minute consult. You make the
Now,
plan
when
on what?
yeah, when you do a plan for somebody, is there ongoing fees or is it just kind of a one-time fee? How does
So
that?
we do both. So we have two types of clients. We have clients that, just like a financial planner, sometimes families just pay that financial planner to put the financial plan in place, and they're like, okay, cool, we can take it from here. So I have clients that do that, that are just like, we just want you to put our aging or crisis plan together with us as a family, and then we'll implement it. These the 27 things that need to be done. They feel confident that they're going to implement it on their own. And when they don't stay on our retainer model services, they will always call back 3 to 6, 9 months later and be like, oh, dad fell again. Now he needs care. And I'm like, okay, so did you tour the facilities that we put on the care matrix? And are they on the waiting list? Or like, where did you get with the aging plan? And they're like, we didn't touch it. And I'm like, ugh. So that's why we encourage families to stay on our care package services, so that we can update the matrix. We can work with you on getting in there to tour those care facilities quarterly or twice a year, to make sure they didn't have leadership changes or a merger and acquisition, that now the care is not like what it was when we first started talking about this. So we have care packages available depending on what level of services and resources that you want from us, so that we, like I said, follow you all the way through end of life.
Would
What
you like to give a big ballpark of how much your service, you mentioned $300 an hour for
Yeah.
consulting services, but what about these packages that you
Yeah,
offer?
so we have different packages. And again, it depends on that 30-minute consult. And why I say that is because it's going to be a different price point for mom and dad who have one son, Martha, or one daughter, Martha, right? And they all get along and they just want one care matrix location, versus like this afternoon, I have a family of 7 kids, and we're wrapping in 2 sets of parents, a blended family, right?
Mhm.
And so
Yeah, so
that's
that's
a
a
very
lot.
different that's a very different price point, and they want 7 different care matrix locations, because all 7 kids live in seven different locations. That's why it's we start with that 30-minute consult. How many care matrices do you want? Typically, one care matrix project location is 5,000 per location. That's like a 15-mile radius. But again, it saves you the time, money, and stress of having to do all of that legwork on your own. So it depends on how many care matrices. A lot of times we're doing a care matrix for each of the locations where the kids live, so they can make an informed decisions on, okay, well, all the facilities in our area are cited for abuse or neglect, or they don't have a memory care unit where I live, but they do where my sister lives. So that's why we have those family meetings. Um,
Yeah, if you want to take that last one, my husband and I don't have surviving parents, but we need to plan our aging needs and our son, who is IDD.
mhm,
Can
mhm.
you work with them?
Yes, absolutely. So we literally work with you wherever you are in your aging, caregiving, dementia journey. So some of our clients are very much in that boat where they're like, we don't really have anyone who can take care of us. I'm in the same boat. I don't have kids though, right? So I don't have anybody other than my siblings. And so we help you wherever you live and wherever you are in that journey of putting a plan together, so that you have that peace of mind of when your needs change, you can have that location in mind already, and be on the waiting list of different care communities and know what the options are.
Fantastic. I'm going to skip some of my slides because I just want to let everybody know that we also do a free consultation where we discuss the plans that we offer. Our planning services start at completely free and go up to, it just depends on what you need. And we explain that, we walk you through that in our free initial consultation. Just like Annalee was saying, ours is on Zoom, usually between 30 to 45 minutes. We want to first answer whatever questions you have. And then we go into, how we work, how we charge families, what exactly it is that your family needs us to do for you, what the cost for that would be. And then you can decide if you would like to move forward with working with us or not. We don't bite, I promise. And we truly are there to answer your questions and help you. So you can use the QR code if you'd like to schedule a meeting with us. It would take you straight to our calendar, or you can call me so I can schedule it for you, or email me. I'm putting both my cell phone number and my email address in the chat box. I don't see any other questions in the chat box for Annalee or for myself. So
Yeah.
unless you have other questions that you want to get out there in the chat box, I will just take this time to say thank you all so much for being here today. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that you call Annalee. I hope you call me for your financial and special needs planning, and call Annalee for your end of life care planning and all of that. And do it before you're in crisis mode. That's the most important thing that both of us say all the time is the sooner the better, right?
And we can help you if, because sometimes when families are like, oh, I think it's too late, because dad needs care or mom fell again, or it's never too late. It's just that now you're not proactive. Now you're in crisis mode and you're going to have crisis outcomes because you're going to get whatever care is available at that time. You won't have any say in what happens, or where your loved one goes, because if you waited so long or your parents waited so long, then they end up in whatever care facility has an open bed. And I promise you that will not be a good fit. I
Yeah.
promise you
Yeah.
that.
All right, everybody. Hopefully we'll see you again at another one of our webinars soon. Thank you for being here with us, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Good. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Annalee. Bye-bye.